he overwhelmed people with his wisdom, teachings, compassion, but overall his presence. Hello, a warm welcome to you who are listening to this recording of the Brixton Tree Ratna Dharma Nights. My name is Amra Pushpa, and tonight I'm very pleased to be launching a new theme on our Dharma Nights, and it's called The Buddha Jewel, and it's based on a book by Sangha called The Three Jewels, but we won't be solely basing it on that. But if you'd like to follow along in this series, I highly recommend this book because we will be following the different themes. And over time, we will be looking at the Dharma Jewel and the Sangha Jewel. But for the next month or so, we're focusing on the Buddha. So, who is the Buddha? Well, you could say that all of Buddhism is related to this one person who lived over 2,500 years ago. And there's been, nowadays, I guess Westerners might be a bit confused and overwhelmed by all the different manifestations of Buddhism in the world, from Zen Buddhism to more complex imagery of Tibetan Buddhism, Theravada. There's such a rich variety and a rich collection of depictions of the Buddha. But it's very good to go back to the roots of Buddhism and the figure of the Buddha to get a sense of what's at root of all this richness and of imagery and stories and teachings of the Buddha. So it's very important to go back to that man who lived over 2,500 years ago. And we actually know quite a bit about this man, who was named when he was born was Gautama. There's quite a bit, particularly around episodes around his enlightenment, and also around the period when he died. We know after gaining enlightenment, he practiced and traveled by foot all over northern India for over 45 years. And there's a rich collection of his teachings that are still available to us today. And so casting our minds back to northern India, he was actually born in what is today known as Nepal. We had a person he was in the warrior class, the Shakyan tribe, a very quite powerful father who was a king. And in the next few weeks, will be exploring some of those conditions that he grew up in. But the essential story for tonight's purposes is he left his surroundings and his family behind, and eventually gained enlightenment. And you could say he became the Buddha. So he went from this ordinary human being to what's known as the Buddha, which I guess could be translated as an awakened one. And as a Buddha, he had a huge effect on every person he came across. And it has been compared, so it's quite beyond a conceptual context that we are ordinarily used to understand really what enlightenment and a Buddha is, because he went beyond our everyday context of concepts. But it could be compared to a human being related to an animal, but being something quite different and beyond an animal, but likewise an enlightened being in that relationship to a human being. And he overwhelmed people with his wisdom, teachings, compassion, but overall his presence. sometimes people would encounter him and just break into tears, or they would have an instant flash of insight, or just have one or two teachings and their lives would be completely changed. And he had thousands and thousands of followers in his lifetime. And he taught orally, and that was the usual way. It was a different caste or class of people that wrote things down at that time, but there was a whole tradition of memorizing, and he would give one or two teachings wherever he'd go, and people would just memorize them. And his companion Ananda had an incredible memory, and in the years after the Buddha died, a great stress was put in writing down everything he taught, and reciting and memorizing this. And so all these teachings come down to us today. So there's a vast collection of these teachings. But as time went on, and people didn't have this living, enlightened being in their presence, there were more and more followers that wanted something beyond the words. That wasn't enough to just have the words. They wanted to connect with who the Buddha actually was. What were those enlightenment qualities? So from that point, Buddhism evolved into a lot of symbolism, more visual depiction, myths, symbolic stories, and in this way, and a lot of these symbols came out of people's meditation, and this underlined a number of Buddhist traditions that evolved in the many years following the Buddha's death. So Buddhism spread to vast geographical territory, but wherever it met different cultures and incorporated many of the indigenous beliefs of that time. It kind of met and tried to assimilate, and didn't necessarily want to wipe out what was there. So again, that created a lot of richness. And these traditions evolved in different countries and different cultures in isolation from each other. So again, this kind of has had a knock-on effect of such seemingly disparate approaches to Buddhism. But it is just meeting maybe this need of human beings to relate to something in their own way, to something that feels live to them. And even when Buddhism came to the West, we have, in the 19th century, some very beautiful, poetic attempts to connect with the living Buddha. And I'm just going to read one of them. One of them's called "The Light of Asia" by Sir Edwin Arnold, and it's very poetic. So it's an attempt to connect with the Buddha's enlightenment in a poetic way that was accessible to Westerners at that time. And so he says, he's describing as the Buddha going to sit down in this, before he gains enlightenment, after making many, many attempts and great efforts. And as he passed into the ample shade of the tree, cloistered with columned dropping stems, and roofed with vaults of glistening green, the conscious earth worshipped with waving grass and sudden flush of flowers about his feet. The forest boughs bent down to shade him. From the river sighed cool wafts of wind, laden with lotus scents, breathed by the water gods. large wondering eyes of woodland creatures, panther, boar, and deer. At peace that evening, gaze on his faith benign from cave and thicket. From its cold cleft wound the mottled deadly snake, dancing its hood in honor of the Buddha. Bright butterflies fluttered their vans, azure and green and gold, to be his fan bearers. The fierce kite dropped its prey and screamed. The striped palm squirrel raced from stem to see. The weaver bird chirped from her swinging nest. The lizard ran. The quail bird sang her hymn, and the doves flocked round. Even the creeping things were glad. Voices of earth and air joined in one song, which ears that hear heard, Buddha, you who have subdued anger and pride, desires and fears and doubts, that for each and all has given yourself. Pass under the tree. The sad worlds bless thee, who are the Buddha that shall assuage her woes. This is the night the ages have waited for. So I just find this a very beautiful way of bringing the Buddha of many, many centuries ago and his enlightenment alive for us in more of a Western tradition. So in the next few weeks, we're going to be just approaching the Buddha from a number of perspectives. So we're going to look at this whole tradition of, the Buddha who I described, Gautama. In one tradition, his was a last of many lives of attempts of gaining enlightenment, so through many rebirths. So there are many stories relating to that. And so we're going to look at these very beautiful tales and that have deep symbolism. And then the following week, we're going to look at what's historically known about the Buddha, the living human being of 2,500 years ago. And then following that, we're going to look at legends, so legends that have arisen. So it's a whole fascinating area. So, legends where it's obvious they're not necessarily factually true, or legends where things just don't scientifically add up. But is there some kind of universal symbolic truth in them that could really help us kind of transcend, our conceptual limits and connect with enlightenment qualities? And we're going to end with a more philosophical overview of the Buddha, and it's known as the Trikaya, or three bodies of the Buddha. In a moment or two, I'm going to talk to my friend Jill, and I think we're going to explore the fact that we have this rich, rich tradition around the Buddha that started with the living Buddha, and but we can choose what we most resonate with and what might work for us. And as practicing Buddhists, I think we're aware of that with our friends. And I'll just say, myself personally, I more connect with that historical living being. That inspires me more. But I'd be interested in hearing what my friend Jill has to say. Okay, so I've got my friend Jill here. Jill's is in the ordination process, so training to be ordained as within the Triratna Buddhist tradition, and she's been a Buddhist for many years and based here in South London. So I've had the good fortune of knowing Jill for a good long time, and just seeing her sincere commitment to Buddhist practice. And I was just wondering, Jill, if you wanted to say something. I talked about all the richness of the Buddhist tradition and all the many ways in to connect with the Buddha. Is there something that stands out for you, that works for you?
Well, I quite like to have that richness and have that variety, actually. So I think definitely the historical Buddha is really helpful.
Yes.
Because he was a real man who lived, and we have historical records, we know that he lived, and to hear the story of his life and what he did and what his teachings were. And of course that's actually quite hopeful then, that we too can become enlightened. Yes. Or at least work towards it. But I think then there's a great beauty in all, and richness in all the other sort of Buddha figures, the archetypal Buddha figures that have come out of that, you know, since then, subsequently. And I think that's really helpful. So sometimes, for instance, I mean, like tonight, I was thinking about Amoghasiddhi because he has the sort of mudra of fearlessness.
Yeah. Do you want to say something about Amoghasiddhi?
And the green, well, that's probably, I'm just starting really to connect with those figures. So although I've been around for quite a long time, I've always tended to really connect with the Buddha. But actually I'm just starting to see the richness of those figures and how helpful they can be. So different figures at particular times. And I know a lot of people will sort of feel a particular affinity for one or other. I do like, there is something about that sort of fearlessness mudra. But also then there's sort of the earth-touching mudra.
So by mudra, what do you
So
mean?
this is, it's a hand gesture.
So a hand gesture.
Yeah, so this for sort of fearlessness. And the earth-touching mudra. I can't quite get down there because I'm sitting on a chair. But yeah, so that appeals to me because I love being outside in nature and so on. And that's very much about showing humanity and our connection with the world and with everybody else. So I think lots of those images can be really helpful.
And how does that relate? Does that relate to the historical Buddha for you? You know, these symbols, you know, like fearlessness or...
Yeah, I think they're facets of him. So it's like they're facets. So we kind of call them archetypal Buddhas, I think, because they have particular qualities, but they are sort of together, they make the whole. So they are very colourful and magical and mythical and mystical and all of those things. And I think there's also something about that kind of helps us to transcend ourselves and our sort of common mundanity. So I really enjoy that about those figures, and I'm thinking of actually sort of doing some colouring and playing around with them, just getting to know them a lot better, because I think that will make my practice a lot richer.
So is there something about colour too? Does that connect to you emotionally? Is there something about the colour? Or...
Yeah, definitely. So I was wearing a lot of red around Christmas, which is kind of the colour of Amitabha. And now it's spring, I'm sort of thinking much more about the greens and blues. And definitely. And I think probably all of us, I mean, I think living in London, we all wear a lot of black. I'm not sure whether that's just so we can sort of hide into the background, or whether it because it's quite dirty living in a big city. But also there is something very liberating about colour and joyful. And I guess in the summer we all tend to wear more colour. So, but it's definitely something you wake up some mornings and think, I just want to wear this colour. And is it something beyond words for you too? You know, colour and... I think so. I think that's the beauty of all of these sort of more mythical images, is that they sort of take you beyond just your common humanity.
And I find it so interesting that these images, you know, came out of people's meditation. And they were really meditating on the Buddha. Now, this is a very idealized image of the Buddha too, and that's what mainly comes down to very, you know, not like the actual human being. We don't really know what he looked like. But, you know, people meditating on the Buddha and his enlightenment, and then these images came up. And through time, names got attached to them. So it can be quite confusing to an outsider when we talk about Amitabha or Amoghasiddhi. But it's like they've taken on a life of their own, don't you think? Because there's so much rich symbolism around it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that again brings richness to the practice, actually.
Yes.
So you can meditate on just one of these figures, and you can sort of particularly, if you feel that you need some protection or help, you can sort of actually almost feel one of these figures with you and around you and protecting you and actually helping to give you those qualities. So I think that's really beautiful, actually, and I love that fact that it's a little bit other.
Yeah. So does that help? I mean, I guess the other way of seeing it is that maybe you have those qualities, but you might need something out there to have some kind of confidence that you have them there.
I mean, I kind of think we probably all have those qualities anyway, but we need to bring them out, and we need confidence, and and this is definitely a way of doing that. And actually, if you sort of can relate to the different figures, then that helps you to sort of see in a way how you can be. So it is also something to aspire to.
So, and you mentioned confidence, and this archetypal figure has this hand gesture that is, sometimes fearlessness, but I think you think it could also give confidence, don't you think? Do you think
I mean, it's quite a strong gesture, isn't it? I mean, I think that is the thing about the mudras, these hand gestures. They are quite a strong image and very powerful. And I've actually noticed I've used certain gestures long before I got involved in Buddhism. And it is very strong, it does have an effect, and it has an effect on yourself, and I think I used to be a massage therapist, so I'm particularly, aware of hands and things, but I think how we use our hands is very telling. And we can sort of be out in the world like that, or we can be sort of clenched like this. I know I've gone for walks sometimes and realised I'm sort of clenched my hands, I'm actually quite tense, and actually if you can just sort of let your hands loosen up and go, that shifts things in yourself, in your body.
And do you make this gesture yourself? I mean, when you're thinking about it, I mean, I'm just, because it can just bring more of ourselves into it if we make a body gesture. I've
used this gesture to stop somebody who was asking me a lot of very personal questions that I didn't know in a really inappropriate space, and I just automatically did that. And it was really effective. I didn't think about it. So that's quite interesting. But I've done it in meditations and actually just sitting, and it does sort of change things. It is interesting.
It is interesting when we bring our body in, and Buddhism is often asking us to bring the whole of ourselves in. So not just the words, is the color, colors or images or body movement, voice, mantra. And this is a way of just lining up our energies. And, this gesture of fearlessness makes me think of how fearless the historical Buddha was. Are you familiar with that story of Angulimala? Well, he was the mass murderer.
Oh yes, when he walked into the woods, even though he'd been warned that the mass murderer was there.
Yes, that's right. So the Buddha was everyone was terrified about Angulimala, and he had this ghoulish way of killing his victims and cutting off their fingers and making a necklace. And he had a goal of having 100, and he was one short, apparently. That's one of the stories. And the villagers said to the Buddha, "Don't go into the jungle, this mass murderer." Everyone was terrified of him. And the Buddha just walked along, and this murderer kept saying to him, "Stop, monk." So again, he was kind of holding up his hand, and the Buddha turned around saying, "I have stopped. When will you stop?" And I could almost feel that hand gesture. Stop. when are you going to stop? You know, and that courage too.
It's very strong, isn't
Yeah, and this man very quickly converted to being a follower of the Buddha. But he, you know, it was one of those quality of fearlessness when he felt he had so much power over people, and you know, and that's kind of that quality has been channeled into this amazing symbol. You know, Mocha City with this hand gesture. You know, pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think for me, you know, the stories of the Buddhas, you know, he was so single-minded in seeking enlightenment, yes. You know, and the stories and about, heroic. Yeah, and the different people that he met who then sort of after they'd taught him, he sort of took the practices on so well, and then they'd sort of ask him if he would stay with them, you know, and teach as well, and it was like, no, this is very good, but I haven't reached enlightenment, you know, I haven't found my goal yet, yes. You know, and he was just really so single-minded with that.
Compromising. Yeah. And, you know, I guess that confidence of a Mocha, or earth-touching too, you know. And you know, you're such a gardener and connected with the earth. I could see that green, that color green, and the earth-touching really appealing to you. So, you know, it's thank you, Jill. I mean, it just is just one very rich aspect of how we connect with the Buddha. So thanks so much for giving us, you know, one of your personal ways in, and look forward to exploring this in the next few weeks.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Great. So I hope you enjoyed that Dharma Night talk. So if you did enjoy it, if you're enjoying our videos, I just want to ask you or encourage you to think about making a donation to the Brixton Buddhist community. We're a UK charity that relies completely on your donations to run everything here. And yeah, if this was a class, a meditation class, there'd be a donation bowl that you could just put in £10 at the end of the night to help support the activities. But as you're watching this online, well, I just want to ask you to think about making an online donation. If you've watched 4 or 5 videos this month, maybe you might want to think about giving £10. So there's a link in the description below where you can go to our website and make a donation. And if you want to keep giving and you don't want to worry about making that donation every month, well, you could just set us up a standing order, a monthly standing order. That would be really, really helpful. Yeah, I want to suggest something of the region of maybe £10 or £20 a month if you're able to do that. And that would be really, really helpful and help us keep producing videos like this one. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourself.